how would the treasury, which is under your portfolio, was involved throughout the process. We have exchanged documents with the legal representatives of the who are participating in this process, and I'm going to take you through or refer you to those documents so that you can assist in this regard. As you have stated that you are responsible for finance within the province, can you just give a broad outline in terms of how budget processes are being planned within the province for each financial year?
Council, let me just interrupt you. I want to know, when were you appointed MEC for Finance?
I was appointed after the 2014 national and provincial elections. I think it was May 2014.
When was the inception of your appointment? When were you first appointed MEC for Finance?
I don't have the exact date with me, Justice, but it was, I have served as MEC for Finance throughout this first term of administration.
We'll have to put some years to that. I really would like to understand how many years were you in your position when the marathon project happened. So it's important to understand rough and ready your date of appointment to now.
Justice, I will get that information for you and submit it under oath, but it was May 2014.
And during the marathon project, were you MEC for Finance?
I was.
Very well. Councillor.
I have served in this portfolio from the time of my appointment in 2014 until today.
2014 to now. Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you. I had requested that we should proceed to give an elaboration of budget processes for every financial year during the period of your position as the MEC for Finance. And as I've indicated earlier on, you may make reference to the documents which we have exchanged, and they are numbered and referred to as ELAS, and it will be ELAH number 156. If you can refer to that document and then give us an explanation of how that process unfolds until the budget is presented.
Justice, if I may refer to the PowerPoint presentation, ELA 156, page 8, has a graphic overview of the provincial budget process. And what is important to explain to the hearing is that the provincial budget process is a year-long process, and provincial budget day for the current financial year would be in March, and from April, that is when the budget process for the following financial year would begin. And that budget process normally begins with an executive council retreat where priorities for the following financial year would be agreed upon by the Premier and all the MECs responsible for different departments. From May until August, it would be the time when each and every department would be involved in planning and budgeting. So this is when departments would say, we have been given these priorities by the Premier, how do we allocate financial resources to the different priorities? It's also important to say, Justice, that departments have different statutory responsibilities, and those statutory responsibilities continue regardless of the particular priorities that a Premier might want to emphasize for that particular financial year. And so the detail of the construction of any provincial budget would be done by the particular department themselves, and they would make allocations to different programs. In August, departments would make their first what we call medium-term expenditure framework submissions, and those would be the budgets for a period of 3 years, a 3-year projection. There is then another Executive Council retreat. It will normally take place in September, and at that Executive Council retreat, different departments might want to raise issues in relation either to political priorities, departmental priorities, or spending pressures that they might face.
Just before you move on, of your total budget, at what point do you decide what allocation would go to a particular department? For example, where and how do you decide what percentage or portion of the budget, of the total provincial budget, is allocated, say, to Department of Health?
Justice, government works on 3-year projections, and those projections are guided by National Treasury, by Provincial Treasury, and also, as I have explained, by the Executive Council in terms of political priorities. I think what is important to say is that in any one financial year, there would not be major variations in terms of budget allocations. I think that what we all understand is that in government terms, a variation of more than 5% will have unintended consequences in any particular financial year. Now, the Gauteng provincial government receives 90...
And that means the allocation wouldn't be any more than 5% more or 5% less. I'm just trying to check if my understanding is correct.
Generally, what one would see in government budgets is that there would always be a cost of living increase, because obviously the salary bill and goods and services bill would increase according to inflation. But you may find a situation where within a program resources are shifted in order that a new priority can be accommodated. So you might find that there is a micro shifting of budget to accommodate a new priority. But if you look at the overall budget, you are not going to see major shifts from year to year.
And they would, by and large, the shift would by and large be within the 5% parameter. Is that what you said?
Yes, Justice.
Very well.
So, Justice, what you can see from this diagram is that the first submissions would be made by departments to Provincial Treasury in August. There would then be the second executive...
I'm sorry, you have to take me to the diagram. I was looking at the slide presentation.
It's slide presentation, page 8.
Thank you. I've got that, thank you.
So what you would see is departments would make their first submissions in August. There would then be a second Executive Council retreat, and I think that that retreat would really be wanting to look, as I've already explained, at any issues that might have arisen in the process of departmental budgeting. And then in September, there would be something that we call the MEC hearings. And those are detailed bilaterals that are held between Treasury officials and officials of different government departments. Now, I'm saying officials because they do not involve the political heads. It would be the accounting officers. The head of Treasury would meet the accounting officers and their financial teams of each and every department. In October is when the Premier's Budget Council will sit, and I will later in my testimony, Justice, explain what the Premier's Budget Council does, because it is relevant to this hearing.
Yes.
And then in November there would be the adjustment budget. And this is a time when departments, if departments are facing extreme financial pressures in the current financial year, there would be adjustments that would be done at that time. It can also be a situation where departments can shift funding from areas where they are underspending to areas of greater priority.
The current financial year, I thought the budget process was always projected to a year ahead.
Justice,
so
we
what
are
happens
always
then in October?
Justice,
Sorry, in November.
Justice, we are always working concurrently with the current financial year and the following financial year. So that those processes happen simultaneously, because we do want to give departments an opportunity in November to say to us, we're in trouble, we need extra money, or we are underspending here, we would like to shift the resources there, while we continue with preparing the budget for the following financial year, which would only be tabled in the provincial legislature in March.
I follow.
So the final, the third round of submissions by departments would then be submitted in November, December, after the adjustment budget, and there would then be a final Premier's Budget Council that would look at the final allocations to departments in February, and that would be prior to Budget Day, which is normally in the first week of March.
And the final submissions reflected on the slide will be prospective, will be about the...
It would be about the it would be about saying this is the actual allocations to departments.
Okay.
But in a sense, Justice, that meeting is usually a formality, because you can see that considerable work has been done in the whole year leading up to that.
Thank you. You have made it clear that the final allocation to various departments occurs during the period of February, according to your testimony. Can you just assist us to give us an indication who has the ultimate or the primary responsibility for budgeting between your portfolio and various departments? And in this particular case, like we refer to the health department.
Well, I think what is important to say is that the priorities are determined by the Executive Council, Lekgotla, or by any policy decisions that might have been taken by the Executive Council during the course of the year. But the actual allocations are done by departments themselves, and there is these MTech hearings. That is where I think the heavy lifting happens, and that is the interface between provincial treasury and provincial government departments.
Who ordinarily would attend the Executive Lekgotla?
The Executive Council normally is attended by all the Premier and all MECs, and the Executive Council Lekgotla is attended by all MECs and all heads of department.
So Executive Council Lekgotla would be the political principals only?
The Executive Council Lekgotla would be the political principals plus the accounting officers, the heads of department.
But would the Executive Council sometimes meet, not in a Lekgotla setting?
Yes, Justice. The Executive Council meets on a monthly cycle, and that Executive Council is attended by the Premier and MECs and the Director General of our province.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just deal with the year during which you were appointed to the position, and in particular, can you just assist us to get an idea of what was the government's approach during the period of 2014 relating to matters of budget?
Again, Council, I'm sorry I've come a little late, but it's still not clear in my own mind how the internal allocation of a department occurs and what impact does the Executive Council has, or the budgetary process has, on the internal allocation of a department. For instance, how does it happen that the Department of Health would choose project?
Justice, the way that I could attempt to explain this is first of all, as I said, department also always works on a 3-year cycle. So after the election, when the 5th administration comes into office, they will find a budget cycle in existence. So when you are appointed as the new MEC, you will find that medium-term expenditure framework already in existence in your department. Your duty as an incoming MEC is to explain to your department at a departmental strategic planning session that would normally happen between May and August of any financial year, to explain what is the thinking of the Premier and what is the thinking of the Executive Council about political priorities. You would understand, I'm sure, Justice, from previous testimony, that we have in Gauteng what Premier Makura terms our 10-pillar program of transformation, modernization, and reindustrialization. So as an MEC, my task is to take that 10-pillar program to my department and to explain to my department which sections of that 10-pillar program are of relevance to my department and what programs we would expect to see in place. But as I explained to you, and Justice, I'm sure you'll understand, I have never been the MEC of Health, but I have been the MEC of Education. And education is a department where there would be lots of statutory services. So if in the 2009, 2014...
I understand where you're going,
yes.
And you're anticipating the debate about who decided whether or not to spend any money on life as a domain. For a moment, at a high level, I would like you to help me understand who decides on the line items within a department.
The department itself. In the end, the head of finance of any department is the accounting officer, and that is the head of department.
Yes.
The Public Finance Management Act defines the head of department as the person responsible for the finances in a department.
Understand that. But at the budgetary level, when they decide they're going to spend only X amount, say on equipment in hospitals, that line item, at what level in the process is it decided? That allocation, how high up and or where is it settled?
My understanding of the internal departmental processes is that every director and chief director would be responsible for constructing their budgets and sending them up to the chief financial officer, who would then be putting together the macro budget. So your directors, chief directors, and deputy director generals would ultimately be responsible for budgeting in their particular area of responsibility. Or should I say for constructing that budget. And of course there would be everybody down the chain would be also submitting into that process, because in any particular area there would be different people responsible.
The same question can be turned around. At the final, I'm looking at a slide on page 8 of LF 156. By the time you reach the PBC in February for final allocation.
Sorry, Justice, which page?
Page 8 that you refer us to of LR 156.
Yes.
By the time you reach final allocation in February before the PBC, what kind of detail would be before the PBC? Would the PBC know whether or not you're going to spend more on wheelchairs or not? Would it know, or can it see you're going to spend more or less on hospitals, more or less on salaries of doctors?
By February, Justice, the primary decision that would be being made in February would be about how to allocate any surplus that might exist, any additional money that we might have accrued as a result of our own revenue-raising initiatives or as a result of allocations from National Treasury. I think the place where we would be looking at the macro budgets would be at the PBC in October. That is where the Premier's Budget Council would be looking at the budgets. But generally, provincial budgets are constructed in terms of programs. And so they would really be dealing, even in October, with macro allocations.
And in October, would you be seeing the micro allocations or not?
Well, Justice,
at the PBC.
In my testimony, I will explain to you what was presented before the PBC in terms of life assessment.
Thank you. You may proceed, Counsel.
Thank you. I was still asking the question about the Treasury's approach relating to budget allocations during the period of 2014. And I put this question to you with reference to the document is LR 153.
This document, LR 153, is the speech which I presented in the Gauteng Provincial Legislature on the 20th of November 2014. And it's what we call the medium-term budget policy statement. And the purpose of that particular statement is not to talk about allocations for the 2014-15 financial year, but it is to talk about what is the economic situation and the fiscal situation that the province is facing, and as a consequence of that, what will be the approach of provincial government to funding the 2014-15 budget. It's also a time when I will announce the adjustment budget for the current financial year, and in that particular situation, sorry, I'm confusing the hearing. The adjustment budget that I would have announced on the 20th of November 2014 would be the adjustment budget for the 14-15 financial year. And the policies that I would be announcing would be the policies that would guide the 15-16 financial year. Now,
you would announce an adjustment of the numbers for 2015, 2014-2015, but the policies would be directed at
15-16.
2015-2016.
Yes.
Okay.
And then when was the main budget allocations?
The main budget allocations would have occurred in March, and I think that if my memory serves me correctly, yes, I made the main budget presentation on the 3rd of March 2015.
Can you please refer to ELA 154?
Yes.
Can you take us through the main aspects?
So, in this budget presentation, this is the first financial year after National Treasury had indicated to the Gauteng Provincial Government that over the 3-year medium-term expenditure framework, starting in the 15-16 financial year, there would be a decrease in the allocation of the equitable share of 1.3 million rand. Now, what I indicated in that budget was, I said very clearly that in order to accommodate this 3-year cut of 1.3 billion rand, we are not talking about austerity measures, and there would be 4 aspects to our financial approach. The first would be to reduce spending on non-core goods and services and fight corruption. The second would be to look for ways to increase own revenue and alternate funding sources. The third, and I think this is very important for this hearing, to maintain spending on quality social services. And lastly, to increase expenditure on infrastructure with the intention of creating work and giving expression to the Premier's program of transformation, modernization, and reindustrialization.
And where are you reading from, MEC? I'm sorry, I got slow there. You're reading from which exhibit, Ella?
So it's
ELA 154.
154, thank
and
you.
And it's page 7, Justice.
Thanks. I've got that, thank you.
And then on page 8, I specifically outline in the budget are cost reduction targets on non-core areas. And I spell out what the targets are and what the non-core areas are. And I think, Justice, it's important to say that the provision of health services, education services, and social services, as well as housing, are core areas of provision for the Gauteng Provincial Government. So when we talk about cost reduction on non-core areas, we are referring to venues and facilities. We're referring to travel, and by venues and facilities we mean for public events. Travel and subsistence, the target was 1.5%. The target for venues and facilities was 21%. Communication, 7%. Catering, 9%. And catering, we're referring to catering at government functions. Advertising, 0.5%. And administration fees, 25%. So those were the actual targets. I then go on in the course of the speech, Justice, if we can move on. To page 20, where I deal specifically with the Department of Health budget. And what I explain there is that over the past 2 years, the Department of Health had been under Section 18 administration of the Public Finance Management Act. So it means that Provincial Treasury from 2013, 2014 up until I think it was May 2015 had been administering the finances of the Department of Health in the province.
Why? What had happened?
Because, Justice, there had been a problem that began from 2009-2010 of what we call accruals. And this is a problem of invoices from one financial year that are not paid within the prescription of 30 days. But in the case of health, these accruals were not paid for several years. And by 2012, when the Department of Health was placed under Section 18 administration, and at that time, Justice, I was not the MEC of Finance, I was the MEC of Education. But I can say for the record that at that time, when it was placed under administration, it was to deal with the accruals, which by the 2012 year were in the region of 4.5 billion rand.
Who were the creditors in relation to these accruals? Who, in rough and ready terms, who were owed the amount of 4.5 billion?
It would have been service providers, and those service providers would primarily be service providers that would be providing our central hospitals, the central hospitals, the teaching hospitals, and the provincial hospitals with goods and services.
And who made the decision to place the department under Section 18 administration?
Premier Nomvula Mokanyane.
And how did the department emerge from that administration?
So what happened during the course of that administration is that while Treasury was administering the department, they began by doing an analysis. Where are these accruals and where is the overspending happening? And as I explained, Justice, the identification and the locus of the problem was the central hospitals and the provincial hospitals. And when Treasury did an analysis of what was causing the problem, what we found was that there were management problems in those hospitals, but there were also financial management problems that related to the management of supply chain. So what had happened, my predecessor, MEC Mandla Nkomfe, had appointed PricewaterhouseCoopers to lead the intervention in the Department of Health. And what they had done is that they had worked on the hospital management in these central hospitals. They had established standard cost centers in those hospitals. They had transformed the supply chain management environment. They'd introduced standard long-term contracts for things like linen, food, medicines, and other medical consumables. They'd set up a hospital management framework, and they'd also done a lot of work on the finance and financial management in those central hospitals. And the result of that was that by the time I made this budget speech on the 3rd of March 2015, we were in the process of winding up that particular intervention and concluding that intervention and handing the health department back to the head of department and the MEC.
Were the accruals cleared?
The accruals had been considerably reduced. Justice, so at that point, under Central Hospital Services, at the end of the 14-15 financial year, the accruals in the Central Hospital Services would have been in the region of 718 million rand. But much of that money would have been current.
Do we know, could you, in the process of trying to resolve this, determine what happened to the money, which was supposed to be paid to service providers? In other words, what was wrong with the supply management chain?
I think that there were two things that were wrong, Justice. The first thing that was wrong was that in the central hospitals themselves, the management was not clear what their budget was, and was not clear that it was their responsibility to spend within the context of their budget. So what happened in those central hospitals was that medical personnel would order whatever they wanted to order, and they would not check when they made those orders whether there were supplies of that particular goods or service in the medical supply depot. They would also not check whether they had budget to order that particular medical consumable. And that is why we put in the transversal contracts, so that there could be greater control over the process of ordering consumables.
So in simple language, they issued contracts for supply of hospital consumables against money they did not have. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Justice.
Or
and
in excess of money that was allocated to them?
Over a period of many years, in excess of money that they had. Or, Justice, they didn't check what was in the stores. It was easier just to order something new and get it delivered than to go and check what was in the stores.
Was anybody held culpable for a $4.5 billion overrun over the years?
Justice,
could you point to some administrators who would allow an overrun and a financial mismanagement of that magnitude?
Justice, I would not be in a position to give you details of that. I was not the MEC of Finance at that time. I was not the MEC of Health. I've merely checked on that. I know what were the key areas of intervention and what went wrong.
Of course, Ms. Creecy, the importance of this inquiry does not escape you, right?
Yes, Justice.
Next to 2015, and the Department of Health decides we don't have enough money to look after mental health care users. So you have to look back and say what went wrong. And then you find that, in fact, the department was under administration, and the decision was preceded by considerable financial mismanagement.
Justice, what I can say to you is that while Provincial Treasury was administering that department, we were able to fix the problem without cutting core services. And we were able to fix the problem because we understood at the end of the day that it was a management problem, not a financial problem. Or should I say, it manifested as a financial problem, but the roots were in the way in which, were in the interface between head office and those central provincial hospitals and the way they were being managed.
But was anybody, that was my question initially, ever held accountable for the financial mismanagement that led to the Section 18 administration? Do you know of anybody whose head rolled for that?
Off the top of my head, I don't have that information, Justice. I don't know what disciplinary hearings would have taken place.
May I proceed?
Thank you. You were still busy dealing with the aspects relating to cost reduction targets with reference to LR 154. You were outlining the matters which were considered to be non-core and in respect of which it was necessary to reduce those costs.
Yes, Justice. I'm now on page
20, I think you were when I interrupted
yes.
you. Mm-hmm.
Yes, page 20. And I do give some detail there on the fact that the Department of Health by this point was complying with all of the audit findings, and that we were confident at that point that our efforts towards strengthening the health system's effectiveness will result in improvements in service delivery. And for that reason, in that financial year, 15-16, we increased the health budget by 496 million. This would have been the provincial contribution for, amongst other things, medical supplies and medicines. And overall, in that financial year, Justice, the department had an allocation of 34 billion rand, which increases to 39 billion in the outer year. So what we can see is between 14-15 and 15-16, which is the budget that we are addressing here, the Department of Health budget was not cut, Justice. It went up from 31.4 billion to 34 billion rand.
Yes, I see that.
Thank you. In line with your effort to ensure that core services are being rendered, and looking at the budget increase during the period of 2015 and 2016, did this trend of increasing the budget for the Department of Health continue?
Yes, Justice, I'd like to refer you to ELA 157, which is a spreadsheet on the Department of Health's finances. And what you can see there is that every year from 2014-15 up until the current financial year, the budget has increased. And what we are showing you there is what was the main appropriation. In other words, what did we do in March of each year? Then the adjusted appropriation. So what did we do in November of each year in the adjustment appropriation? And then we also show you expenditure. So that's actual against budget. And what you will see is that I've already said from 14-15 to 15-16, the budget increased from 31.4 billion to 34.1 billion.
Yes.
16-17, the budget increased from 35.3 to 37.6. And 17-18, which is the current financial year, the budget has increased from 37.6 to 40.2. Obviously, the current financial year is still ongoing, so we can't show you actual outcomes.
So the notion that there ought to be a cut on core services was totally foreign to your financial planning and budgeting, was it?
Yes, Justice.
The assertion that there was massive pressure from Treasury, national and provincial, to reduce expenditure on core services is false?
Yes, Justice. The pressure was on non-core services.
Well, we'll come back to that. Also, the importance of that point does not escape you either. We'll
No,
have
Justice.
to revert back to it.
No, Justice.
Up to now, the evidence has been cut costs on mental health care users. because the state doesn't have money to fund their care. That's what Dr. Manamela says, that's what Dr. Silibano said, and that's what former MEC Mahlangu said. Is there any truth in that assertion?
Justice, I would like to take you through the budget for mental health services, and I will show you the figures. I think that you can then draw your own conclusions from the figures.
I'm going to wait until you do that. Council, you may proceed. But thank you for LR 157. I've seen the numbers and their progression.
Thank you, MEC. As you have dealt with this aspect relating to the department, the department's budget been increased over a period of time, I would like you to assist and deal with the question that the Justice has just raised with specific reference to the budget for mental health. And if you can just go ahead and deal with that with reference to LR 160.
Thank you very much. Justice, LR 160 is the mental health services budget and expenditure for the period 2013-14 up until the current financial year. And what we have done in Treasury is we have brought together all the different areas in the budget where we fund mental health care services and psychiatric services. So you will see there that we're dealing with psychiatric hospitals, Life Esedimeni, mental health non-profit institutions, mental health district services, and then the total. Now, overall, Justice, what we are showing you is what was the original budget. So if I can start with 2013-14, the original budget was 1.1 billion. The adjusted budget was 1.073 billion. The actual expenditure was 1.011 billion. And in that financial year, there was an under expenditure of 62 million. The following year, 14-15, the budget was 1.161. The adjusted budget was 1.190, and the actual expenditure was 1.237, and there was an over expenditure in the 14-15 year of 47 million rand. If we can then move to the 15-16 financial year.
But before you do, Life Esedimeni line item reflects no reduction in actual expenditure, even after the adjustment. In fact, the adjustment was nil adjustment.
That's correct, and in fact,
Justice. Sorry, Justice. It's me.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to intervene. We were only provided with the document a couple of hours ago. Could I please ask the witness to just repeat what she said, because we were scrambling to follow, and I don't want to miss anything. I'm sorry for the intervention, but I'm sorry.
Your intervention caused somebody to
fall down. Apologies for that.
Sorry there, are you okay? It's a camera person, sorry, ma.
Sorry, Jess, we haven't had a chance to look at the document before now, so if we could just go through it a bit slowly so we can digest it.
Yes.
Thanks.
No doubt we're going to do that, and let me see, Chris has heard you. Would you just want to repeat that?
And let me apologize to Council for the late production of this. We only found out on Friday that you would be interested in this information, and it was quite a task to assemble it because the information was in different budget heads. So this information begins with the 2013.
For starters, has Council got LR 160 before her? Do you have it before you, Council?
Yes, I have it now.
Oh, okay, very well. Let's proceed. Does every council have it? We are all on the same sheet, so to speak. Okay.
So we begin in the 13-14 financial year. And this is, it's before my time, but we thought it was relevant to show you trends, because this is when 13-14, the department was still under the administration of Provincial Treasury. So what you see there is that the budget that was allocated was 1.156 billion. The adjusted budget was 1073 billion, and the actual expenditure was 1011 billion, and there was an under expenditure in that financial year of 62 million. The following year, which is 2014-15, the budget was 1.161 billion. It was adjusted upwards in November to 1.190 billion. The actual expenditure was 1.237 billion, and in that financial year there was an over expenditure of 47 million rand. We now move to the next financial year, and 15-16 I think is one of the controversial years.
Yes.
And what you will see there, Justice, is that in 15-16, the over expenditure of the previous financial year is taken into account in the overall balance. So these services receive 1.268 billion in the original budget. It is adjusted upwards in November to 1.289. The actual expenditure is 1.228, so there is an under expenditure of 60 million. The following year.
And in relation to life as a demand, there was an under expenditure of 29 million. Do I read it correctly?
That's correct.
29.2 million under expenditure.
That's correct, Justice. In the following year, which is the 16-17 financial year, the overall budget for mental health services was 1.350. So it's up again from the previous year. The adjusted budget is slightly down. It's 1.290, and the actual expenditure is 1.279, and there is an under expenditure of 11 million rand. And I think if you read the Life Esedimeni line, what you can see is that there is a reduction of the Life Esedimeni budget, but there is money going elsewhere. So overall, in terms of mental health services, there was no decrease from the side of provincial government in terms of mental health services.
But what were they then doing? What is this all about, Ms. Creecy?
I can't say, Justice.
But why would they shut down a facility when the numbers show that there was more than enough money to look after mental health care users, not generally, even at Life Esedimeni? What was all this about? Do you know? Can you make sense of this?
I don't know, Justice. I can only present you the figures.
Okay, let's see. Let's go slowly. Do the figures suggest to you that there was any need to shut down a facility that abruptly?
Justice,
on the grounds of finance, at least.
Justice, I would like to answer that question when I present to you what was told to us in the Premier's Budget Council.
Okay.
I'm still coming there.
Let's defer it to them. Very well. You go
on. Thank you.
Just for the record, Justice, if I can complete the story, in the current financial year, the budget for mental health services is 1.412 billion. It's been adjusted to 1.413, and as of December, we had spent 1.136 billion. So I don't really want to go into the variance because you would understand that December is not the end of the financial year. So it doesn't really tell us
but those
about the
actuals would include actuals related to reabsorbing survivors or from the marathon project, isn't it so?
Yes, Justice. If you look under the item of Life Asedimeni, you would see that the expenditure there is 142 million, and it's up from what was the original projection. And my understanding would be because there would be patients that would have been reabsorbed.
Very well.
You have previously dealt with the need to reduce costs, and you have you gave much detail about that. Can you just assist this hearing what actually informed that policy decision with reference to LR 149?
Justice, LR 149 is the Government Gazette number 10058 of 15 November 2013. And this Government Gazette regulates cost cutting by all provincial departments and their accounting officers. And what this Gazette says, and I'm not going. It's quite a long document. I'm not going to go through it in the interests of time. But what it says is that from the 1st of January 2014, the cost containment measures that must be implemented by all accounting officers, all heads of department, whether at national or provincial level, it's consultants, travel and subsistence, expenses relating to catering and events, arrangements related to debit and credit cards, and containment of the provincial of the wage bill.
On which page of the Gazette do I find all that?
It's from page 2. Page 2 would be consultants and travel and subsistence. It's item 4. So 4.1 would be consultants, 4.6 travel and subsistence. It would then go on page 4, 4.23 expenses relating to catering and events. It would then go on to page 5, 4.27 arrangements related to debit and credit cards. And lastly, the issue of sorry.
That's pretty confusing, I must say. I think we have to start again. I have before me LR 149.
That's right.
On its cover, it's Government Gazette 37042 of the 15th November 2013.
That's correct.
And if you turn it over, I can see signed by the Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan. And then there's a schedule. So the numbering you refer to is that numbering of the schedule.
No, if we can go after the schedule.
Or is it what appears to be a circular on cost
yes,
containment?
it's the National Treasury Instruction Note.
So the numbers refer to that one.
Yes,
Okay,
my apologies.
Let's start all over again then. Are council with us? I know we're flipping quickly over documents. Are we together? Okay, very well. Then we are looking at the circular on cost containment measures. What do you say is relevant and important for us to look at?
Page 2, it lists the items that are targeted for cost containment. And 4.1, engagement of consultants. And then we go further down that same page, 4.6, travel and subsistence. And there's lots of detail on travel and subsistence on page 3 and half of page 4. And then we go to expenses related to catering and events, 4.23. And lastly, on page 5, 4.27, arrangements related to debit and credit cards. So these measures, Justice, are all about the guidelines that National Treasury gave all of us as to where we were to cut costs.
We were told repeatedly that the cost containment in relation to life as a demanding was demanded by National Treasury. And the guidelines point in a different direction.
Justice, I can only show you what binds us as departments in terms of the Government Gazette and Treasury regulations.
But is there any part in this that would justify the assertion by the MEC and Dr. Manamela and Dr. Silibano that they were constrained to cut expenditure towards life as a demanding because Treasury demanded it, or demanded of them to save costs?
What Treasury demanded was that we save money on consultants, travel and expenditures, travel and subsistence, expenses relating to catering and events, and arrangements related to debit and credit cards. And that is what National Treasury has been monitoring in each and every department since the circular came into effect on the 1st of January 2014. It's also monitored, Justice, by the Auditor General.
Well, I know you seem to be scrumming away from saying your colleagues were blatantly wrong in telling us that they were obliged by Treasury to cut costs on patients. Can that be justified?
Treasury has never demanded that any department cut core services.
Council.
MEC, earlier on you have taken us through L156 with regard to budget processes. Can you just assist to give us an indication what did the Department of Health present before the Premier Budget Committee? But before doing so, please just explain how is the Premier's Budget Committee composed and what is its objective?
Justice, with respect, before I answer that question, because it relates to the issue that you were asking me about what instructions have Treasury given to departments, Provincial Treasury. I have requested permission and received permission to declassify an executive council document. It's LO155. Subject, Gauteng
Yes.
Provincial Government.
And we're not committing any crime by looking at secrets, are we?
No, Justice,
It is properly declassified.
you can look at it freely.
Okay.
Justice, the date of this Executive Council memo is the 22nd of July 2015. And the subject of this memo is Gauteng Provincial Government Own Revenue Generation Strategy and Cost Containment. Now, you will recall, Justice, that in my budget speech of the 3rd of March 2015, I had...
And is this a minute of the meeting?
This is the decision. This is what we call an Executive Council memorandum, and it is the decision that we asked the Executive Council to make on revenue generation and cost containment.
And that was on the 22nd of July 2015.
Yes, Justice.
Thank you.
Now, Justice, because overall government budgets were facing constraints, and because overall we were aware as provincial government that there was a high level for demand on our services, you will recall that in my budget presentation of 2015, March 2015, I indicated that we wanted to try and do two things. The first was to increase our own revenue. It's only 5% of our budget, but in tough financial times, it's significant. And secondly, what we had indicated at that time was that we had set specific targets on containing costs. This document sets out how we intended to raise revenue, and I'm not going to go into it because it's very long and technical, and not necessarily the subject of this investigation, but I think it's important because it shows the commitment we were making in a situation where we were facing cuts from National Treasury to ameliorate the complexities that our own departments were facing, but doing everything in our power to improve our own revenue generation. And then what it does is that it makes a decision of the Executive Council, those cost containment measures that I mentioned in my budget speech. So if there's a decision of the Executive Council, then it's not just what the MEC of Finance feels like saying in public. It is what binds members of the Executive Council and their departments. And that's why we took it to the Executive Council, because we said this is where we want to contain costs.
Was Ms. Mahlangu, MEC then for Health,
she was
present at this meeting?
She was, Justice.
And did she raise dissent to the decision or the strategy contemplated in LO 155?
I don't remember MEC Mahlangu raising any dissent on this matter. I know that where there were concerns on this memo, it really related to the issues of travel and subsistence. And that really, Justice, was about the different types of operations that different departments are involved in. So if I can make an example for you, if you have a blanket ban on travel of more than 100 kilometers per month for all government employees, where you have agricultural extension officers, in one day, those agricultural extension officers will have traveled 100 kilometers, and then for the rest of the month, they will not be able to do their work. So what we were trying to show colleagues is that we are setting targets here, but it's up to departments to show us how they will save money in terms of those targets. So that was the purpose of this memorandum.
Page 10, at the bottom thereof, seems to speak to implementation of cost containment measures. What is of significance there?
Do you want me to read the section? Managing public sector expenditure involves balancing a range of competing priorities. A better mix between personnel, capital, and goods and services spending is needed, and also requires a conscientious effort to ensure that all expenditure categories are properly costed and to improve the link between budgeting and planning. The prevailing economic conditions outlined elsewhere and the importance of protecting the provision of essential services and boosting infrastructure spending make it incumbent upon the Gauteng provincial government to revisit the composition of the provincial government.
Now, that's my point. I mean, the document talks to the importance of protecting the provision of essential services. And one of your former colleagues comes before this arbitration and says that it was the decision of the provincial, or the Premier's Budget Council, that she may, or her department may reduce expenditure on healthcare, and in particular on mental health care.
Justice, perhaps it's a good time for us to go to what was presented to the Premier's Budget Council and what the Premier's Budget Council said about what was presented to it.
Yeah, you certainly should go there sometime. I needed to understand LR 155 and its importance in your evidence. So I invite you to draw my attention to those parts that you require me to read. That's the one part that seems to be obvious. The next paragraph talks about non-core.
Yes.
You don't have to read it line by line.
Yes.
You could explain or read whatever is convenient,
Yes.
so that we understand what was said about essential services and what was said about non-core items.
I think, Justice, what this paragraph says is in keeping with the spirit of cost containment, particularly with regard to non-core items. The Gauteng Provincial Treasury has drafted a cost containment circular to all provincial departments based on a similar National Treasury instruction, outlining in detail the areas in which expenditure is to be curtailed and the necessary control measures are instituted that ensure that all expenditure incurred is necessary, appropriate, paid promptly, and subsequently reported on. And the circular then goes into detail. When we talk about administrative fees, what do we mean? When we talk about communication, what do we mean? And then on page 12, Justice, we specifically talk about, there is a table there, table 5, on page 12. And what table 5 does is it lists the items that are targeted for cost containment, and it lists for each year, for each item, what we expect provincial government as a whole to save. And those items are operating payments, travel and subsistence, communication, consumables, venues and facilities, catering and departmental activities, administration fees and entertainment. And the overall target for the whole of provincial government, not for the Department of Health, for the whole of provincial government, is to cut 10% of non-core spending in the 2016-17 financial year to realize 158 million rands worth of saving. So this is our target for cost cutting on non-core items over a 3-year period.
So what was this obsession about? What was this whole mantra about? Shutting down life as a demene? To achieve what? To save what?
I don't know, Justice.
Counsel?
Thank you, MEC. You were still to deal with the composition and the purpose of the Premier Budget Committee.
Thank you very much, Counsel. Justice, I'm dealing with ELA 150, and it's the terms of reference for the establishment of the Premier's Budget Committee. And there is a Word document, but there is also a PowerPoint. And although the pages are not numbered, if we use the title page as 1, 2, 3, I would like to turn to slide 4 in the PowerPoint, and it's entitled Roles and Responsibilities.
And you all, Council, have ELA 150 in the slide PowerPoint. And which slide should we look at?
So it's if you count the title page of the slides as 1, it's slide 4. And it's entitled Roles and Responsibilities.
Thank you.
So it says there, the Premier's Budget Council will make final budget allocations for priorities and pressure points. And I want to emphasize this issue of pressure points, because I have explained to you, Justice, that even in tough financial situations, the Department of Health has received additional money in every budget and every adjustment. And that is relevant to this inquiry, because if at any stage we'd been told we can't fund statutory services, please give us more money, that could have been taken into consideration. Engagement on budgetary issues on an ongoing basis, as well as significant improvement on resource allocation, reorientating expenditure away from consumption towards investment, in other words, infrastructure. And then there is stuff about infrastructure delivery, so making sure, Justice, it's not relevant to this inquiry, but the reason why it's there is because historically a number of provincial departments have underspent on their infrastructure budgets, and infrastructure is obviously very important in terms of job creation. So the Budget Committee would be scrutinizing spending on infrastructure budgets and trying to ensure there was efficiencies. Ongoing assessment on the utilization of provincial resources, and explore creative and dynamic approaches to expedite infrastructure delivery and job creation.
So when an MEC has a pinch, a financial pinch on her shoe, this would be the place to come, isn't it?
Yes, Justice.
And that ordinarily ought to be reported to the Premier's Budget Council, which engages budgetary issues on an ongoing basis, and would also focus on resource allocation processes.
Yes, Justice.
So if life as a demene was a real financial burden and it was going to break the dam walls, would this be the place where that would have to be reported?
Yes, Justice.
And this is the place where the allocations and adjustments would then be considered and perhaps approved?
Yes, Justice.
Very well. And just before I go away, MEC Mahlangu claims that this is where she raised the strains and stresses of her department, financial strains and stresses.
Justice, I'm going to show you her presentation.
You're going
now.
to come and show us her presentation at that meeting.
Yes, Justice.
Very well. Again, we wait. Counsel?
Yes. Can you then proceed to indicate if did this council hold any meeting with government departments, and if so, when was this meeting held, and what were the issues?
I think it's important, Justice, just to say to you, from the side of the executive authorities, in other words, the MECs, who was a member of this council. I think it's relevant. So the Budget Council is chaired by the Premier David Makura, and the members of the Budget Council are myself as the MEC for Treasury, and then the heads of the clusters in their capacity as heads of clusters. So MEC Lebogang Maile is the chair of the economic cluster, so he was a member of the Budget Council. MEC Ismail Vadi is the chair of the governance cluster, so he was there in that capacity. And MEC Mahlangu herself, as chair of the social cluster, was a member of the Budget Committee in that capacity.
As head of the social cluster?
Yes. Now, perhaps it's important to share with you, Justice, why was the Budget Council created in that way? And the reason it was created in that way was that obviously I would be the custodian of provincial finances, but each of the chairpersons would be representing the interests of their particular clusters. So if there were budget shortfalls in the social cluster, it would be up to the social cluster chair to be saying, no, you can't be switching all the money to the economic cluster. What about education? What about health? If there were, if the priority was to improve economic performance, MEC Maile would be saying, what about the economic department? So it was constructed in that way so that the different interest groups within provincial cabinet had a voice in the decision-making process. So
Thanks.
The first meeting council of the budget, of the Premier's Budget Council, was on the 11th and the 13th of November 2014. And after that meeting, or at that meeting, there was a request made to the MEC of Health to return to that meeting. And although you do not have this document, Justice, this is the letter which I wrote to the MEC of Health, which I will read. Dear MEC Mahlangu, thank you for your input. You don't have this document, no. But I will read it to you. It's a short letter. Thank you for, let me take this opportunity to thank you, and so on. Subsequent to the meeting, it was decided that your department should come back to the PBC with feedback on the following. 1, the Health and Provincial Treasury to provide a progress report on the intervention and indicate what is outstanding and what still needs to be done. 2, the department should demonstrate decisions being taken on their budget and share the quantification of their cost containment. And 3, the department should demonstrate clearly areas where they would direct resources if there were additional resources. So we're saying, if we've got more money to give you, where would you like it? So, can I proceed, Counsel, to...
Let's find a way to deal with that letter. I would like to have it to come. Its date again, would you repeat its date?
I can get you the signed copy of this letter. This letter is an unsigned copy. So I think we would want to submit it to you, together with any other information you would want.
Very well. Once it is, we'll provisionally admit it, but council have to see it so they can pose questions. So Advocate Utama, would you arrange that gets, your attorney arrange that gets copied and made available to all your colleagues? And we shall name it Ella how much?
Sorry? Ella?
Ella 162.
Ella 162. Very well, that is provisional admitted, and the signed copy can be made available later. You may proceed, MEC or council.
You were still dealing with the first meeting of the Premier's Budget Council. And whilst you are still on that point, earlier on you testified with reference to LR 149 in relation to the memo or the directive from National Treasury, which required the departments to take measures for cost reduction. And can you please refer to LR 151 in relation to the Gauteng Provincial government's effort in making sure that guidelines were made in relation to those issues?
So, Justice, I've already explained in terms of the National Treasury Gazette, which is LA 149. Because we are now talking about November 2014. And so we are bound by, at this stage, we are bound by the Provincial Government Gazette, LA 149. And I've already explained to the proceedings the non-core items that were targeted for cost containment. So when we asked the department to present on cost containment, it was in relation to Circular 149. Because all of us were expected to contain our costs. You would also see that the first item was about the health intervention. So it's also about progress in containing spending in the central hospitals on goods and services in line with the provincial treasury intervention in that regard.
But before you move on, I'm a little confused. What is LA 151?
Okay, that's the document I want to move on to, Justice.
Oh, very well.
LA 151 is the presentation that was made by the Department of Health on the 26th of November 2014, when they returned, as requested by my letter, LA 162, to the Premier's Budget Council.
So this is a presentation from Department of Health?
Yes, Justice.
Mm-hmm. Who at the meeting made the presentation?
It would have, the MEC would have given an initial overview, and the details of the presentation would have been made by the head of department.
Yes. And who was it then?
Dr. Selebano.
Dr. Selebano. And the MEC would have done the introductory overhead comments and remarks about the presentation.
That is normally how it works, Justice.
Very well, you may continue.
Thank you, Justice. So we're now working on document 151, and you will see that the first issue that they refer to is cost containment. And they talk about litigation against the department. They talk about Selby Park and Alexander Clinic. And then on page 3, slide 6, they refer specifically to Life Esedimeni. And I want to read what this presentation says. It says 20% of the 251 per annum currently paid to Life Esedimeni. The original contract was signed with the National Department of Health on the 1st of August 1979, and they talk about 50.2 million saving. And then under risks, they say that departmental institutions may not have adequate capacity to absorb patients from Life Esedimeni facilities. Now, our understanding of this presentation was that the intention was to gradually close down services offered by this facility. And our understanding of 20% was that 20% per annum, as it says. And I suppose one can assume from that we're talking about a 5-year project. And that the intention was to absorb these patients into departmental institutions. It doesn't say into NGOs. It says departmental institutions. Now, Justice, I would then, it then goes on the different cost saving.
Well, then before you walk away from there, I just want to understand those entries, which are rather fine. So the plan was to save 50 million a year over a period on a base of 250 million. Is that a correct understanding?
Well, I think if we go back to the presentation I did on the budget for Life Esedimeni, I think I would have to just check, but I think the budget was 265, if I'm correct.
Yes. Here they have it as 251, anyway.
Well, yes. And
that might be before the adjustment.
Sorry, in 14-15, the budget was 251. And in 15-16, it was 265.
So let me see.
So at that time, the budget was 251.
Yes. If I understand the entry, they say then they were paying 251 million to Life Esedimeni, and they would want to save 20% of that number
per annum.
Per annum. And then they add that the contract was signed with the National Department of Health in August 1979. And they then drop a number, 50.2 million, as the saving anticipated.
Yes, Justice.
Now, immediately thereafter, there's the column on risks. What does that speak to? Does it mean departmental institutions may not have adequate capacity to absorb patients from Life Esedimeni?
Our understanding of this presentation was that the MEC wanted to provide the same care that was being provided by Life Esedimeni in state institutions over a period of time, and that the success or failure or her ability to implement and the department's ability to implement this project would depend on availability of beds in state institutions. So that was our understanding.
Is there any mention, or could we infer a mention of NGOs from that presentation?
There was no mention of non-governmental organizations in this presentation.
And who would have drawn attention to this risk that there may very well be insufficient beds at departmental institutions?
Just as I do not remember who drew attention to it, but it was there. And our understanding was not that if the beds didn't exist in government institutions, patients would be put elsewhere. Our understanding was we may not be able to do this because there won't be beds available. That was our understanding.
And the budget numbers you showed us reflected no reduction in the subsequent financial year. They seem to reflect an increase. Could you help us understand that?
Well, what I said when I made that presentation is that you will see that money moves from one institution to another. But the total amount of money that is spent on mental health services, in fact, increases in the 16-17 financial year. It's not decreased.
Council?
Thank you. Whilst you were dealing with the presentation made by the Department of Health, can you then take us through what has been the outcome of that meeting?
I will do that, Council. I would just like to draw the Commission's attention to the documentation from slide 8 onwards. And slide 8 onwards is priority areas if additional money is available. So the department, and you will see, there are various things there: electronic patient records, archiving, reducing waiting times, laundries, equipment. So there are different budget heads there. But nowhere there does it say that we are not able to provide services for psychiatric patients or for mental health services. And we specifically asked them, where do you need additional money? And we did indeed give them additional money. Justice, if I may proceed, yes, with your permission, to the minutes of the Premier's Budget Council, and it's Ella 152. Page 2 of the minutes. So the department has suggested that they will reprioritize and they will move patients from Life Esedimeni to departmental facilities. And the Premier's Budget Council says the department should ensure that the reprioritization does not affect the quality of services. So we're saying to them, if you want to transfer patients from Life Esedimeni to state institutions, you can do that, but you cannot diminish the quality of services. If you think that we can do this more cost effectively in-house, that's fine, in departmental institutions. But the The department should ensure that the reprioritization does not affect the quality of services.
And do you know that just about the time when that minute was drawn, the contract, I hope my memory serves me well, at Life Esidimeni was cancelled?
I think, Justice, that the Life Esidimeni contract, the letter that Mr. Selebano wrote, was the 29th of September 2015.
29 September 20, we are at 2014.
Yes, this is November 2014. This is when the department indicated to us that they wanted to transfer patients to departmental facilities, by which we...
I'm sorry, yes, it's a year later.
It's 9 months, 10 months later.
Cancellation is 10 months later. Thank you for the correction.
Then you were dealing with your understanding of the Department of Health's measures to cut or reduce costs, and according to your understanding was that there was going to be a bed capacity reduction of 20% over a period of time. And now we know that that was not followed through. The patients were not sent to the institutions as indicated to you at the Premier Budgets Council meeting. We have already had the evidence that, in fact, the patients were sent to the non-governmental organizations. Do you have any knowledge about the appointment of those NGOs with regard to the provision of services to the department? Whether was there any supply chain process which was followed in their allocation?
Justice, again, I would want to apologize to Council because we only this morning submitted a document, ELA 161. And ELA 161, what my understanding, Justice, was that last week you had asked a question. Did the budget follow the transfer? And we spent time in the course of yesterday trying to answer that question, Justice.
Justice, if I can just interrupt the witness. In light of what she has said about the presentation of this document to the other side, I find it appropriate that we may take the adjournment at this time for tea, and it will also allow my learned friends to be able to go through the document when we resume.
Yes. That is a wise suggestion, Council. I will take the tea adjournment now, and we will resume at 12 midday, and you are requested to be here present at 12 when we resume. MEC, thank you. Adjourned.